So now I'd like to invite Jane Talbot, the president and CEO of Downtown Van, to introduce our fourth panel called A Place to Call Home, and our moderator. Jane?
Thank you, Jess, and thank you to you and your team for pulling together such a compelling group of panelists and speakers. On behalf of the Downtown Vancouver BIA, we are so pleased to join all of you here today. Downtown Van represents 8,000 businesses in 90 blocks of the central business district of our city. Our members see and feel the impact every single day of every issue that we have and will discuss today. And frankly, like all of you, they've had enough. Status quo is clearly not working, and it cannot continue. The need for a safe downtown in Vancouver or any other city in BC is absolutely essential, and it is critically important that we all work together to push for measurable, meaningful, and sustainable change in our cities and communities. Whether you are from Vancouver, Prince George, Victoria, Nelson, or any other small town, large town community in our province, your business and residents deserve to feel safe wherever they work and live. Our fourth panel today, which is called A Place to Call Home, dives into the importance of housing and the type of care and services that play a critical part in providing specialized housing for those in need and who often suffer from addiction and mental health issues. This session's moderator is Richard Zussman, a name and face we all recognize from his nightly news on Global Television. Richard is a Jack Webster Award winner, and we are delighted to have him with us to moderate this timely and important discussion. Please join me in welcoming Richard and his panelists to the forum.
Thank you, Jane, very, very much. Thank you, Jess and Save Our Streets for hosting us all today. Obviously, there are a lot of pieces at play here when we talk about these issues of our safe streets. But we know over time that the issue that matters the most to British Columbians is housing and finding a place that's affordable to live. And we've seen that play out in this ongoing crisis that we've experienced in this city and in this province, and addressing the need for housing and how we do housing is a critical piece in addressing the long-term solutions to safe communities and safe streets. My panel today, joining me, Heidi Hartman is the Associate Vice President of BC Housing. Please give Heidi a hand. Deb Lester is the CEO of Covenant House, Vancouver. Deb, thank you so much for doing this. And the mayor ruined some of my thunder, but Sam Sullivan is here, the former mayor of Vancouver, former MLA, and founder of CEO of Global Civic Policy Society. They are all joining me now for a conversation on housing. So I just want to start on something Mayor Sim said there around the way in which we do housing in this province, and especially in Metro Vancouver, has been for supportive housing consolidated mainly in the downtown east side. And I remember interviewing about to become Premier David Eby in November of 2022, a week before he was sworn in as Premier. One of the things he said is we need to move the resources outside of the downtown east side to other communities in Metro Vancouver. We haven't seen a whole lot of that yet, and the mayor's saying now enough is enough. So Deb, I guess I'll start with you. What is your sense of how we can do supportive housing, and is there a need in our community to move that outside of what we see in the downtown east side?
Well, first of all, just want to thank SOS for having us here today. We're really looking forward to the conversation. We've had really, just robust conversations, and obviously this is work that we're very invested in. I want to just say, first of all, before I answer your question, a lot of what I heard, today is around an investment in youth and around root cause, around community collaboration, intersectionality. Let's get upstream. Let's look at long-term, solutions, and let's integrate systems. And so, to your question, again, Richard, what we have found at Covenant House is that we have a full continuum of care under our umbrella. So we have support for young people age 16 to 24, and we really have, programs that can meet young people where they are in their journey towards health and well-being. So we could say that, part of the continuum is complex care. So we look at, what we call our outreach that we do, our drop-in programs that we have, at some of those more complex, low-barrier programs, and then we go into our supportive housing programs as well. And that's where we can really start to look at case management, and, in all of our programs, we really, bring in all of our different, what we call wraparound services, right through to what we call our Rites of Passage program, which is where we get ready for life. We're working on life skills all throughout, but really looking at that transition to independent living. And what we've found is that continuum, if we look at, come from a public health background, that's incredibly important, because it's rooted in the social determinants of health. So all that we do is rooted around, education, income, health, which is, mental health, and all of those different components. And so really, meeting young people in our community where they are in that journey is incredibly important. So in terms of moving outwards, I would say it's the access and that continuum under one roof right now that is really important in what we see. And we've got a lot of data that backs that up as well, and testimonials from those that are, have used our services.
Yeah, Sam, I just want to get your thoughts on this. I know you've looked at housing solutions all around the world. How important is it to move housing resources out of one central area where you don't have neighborhoods that become a beacon for supportive housing, and rather distribute them amongst large metropolitan areas?
Well, Lynn and I were just in Switzerland a few months ago, and we spent a week being toured around by the two gentlemen who shut down Europe's largest open drug scene. In Zurich and Bern, there was thousands of homeless drug addicts in those two cities, and they shut it down. And they all the 12 experts that I interviewed said they really opposed the Vancouver model of putting all of our drug-addicted people in an 8-block square area. They couldn't imagine how we would sleep at night. And I said, no, this is the progressive way. And they were just appalled, So and I'm just going to take a little bit of a history tour here, because Lynn and we both worked in the downtown east side, what we call it now. I actually took karate lessons when I was a teenager on Abbott and Hastings, and Lynn worked at Woodward's. I worked at the spaghetti factory as a busboy. And we walked through this area, and there was no problem. It was a little bit gritty once in a while, but it was a very healthy neighborhood. And I did a little Google word search on downtown east side, because we'd never heard these words before. And you show it, and it's 1972, 1973, they explode. And that's when the word showed up. So I started doing research, and I found that Vancouver was full of low-income housing. It was called rooming houses. It was market-oriented, mostly older women that would have large houses, and they split them up into little bedrooms, and all these low-income people could live in all the neighborhoods of Vancouver. And those got shut down, started in the 1970s, and they were moved, slowly but surely, into the residential hotels in the downtown east side. And the downtown east side was renamed, and the City of Vancouver Legal Department created an organization, incorporated, it was called the Downtown Eastside Residents Association. And that was the first time we ever got to hear those words, created by the City of Vancouver, moving all of the people who used to live in integrated, just dispersed market housing. And there was no concentration. And this is how it used to be. And then we slowly but surely solved the problem and really fixed things by putting everybody in one place. So really, I think that's where I'm pushing right now, Global Civic Policy Society, where we've got an initiative starting this year to say, let's end the concentration. This is totally cruel. It's the wrong way to go. And what they say I asked the people in Switzerland, what is the optimal number of drug-addicted people that live in one building? And they said, absolutely no more than one. You don't want more than one person living. And if we look at this research, we find most of the people in downtown Eastside came from outside in different areas, and they got into some sort of trouble, and they ended up getting just drawn in by a gravitational pull to this area, and every indicator of health went down. More addiction, more death, more sickness, everything got worse. And then in the Chez Soi, closer to home research, they moved 500 people. They asked them, where would you like to live? And 84% of them said, we don't want to live in the downtown east side. And no one had ever thought of asking the people with addictions, do you want to live in the downtown east side? Because they don't want to. 84% would leave if they could. And so they now enabled them to live outside. And as soon as they moved out, everything got better. So I love everything that was said today. I think there's a lot of really important work. But I would add this other point that nobody's really looked at drug addiction as a urban planning issue. They always think it's a medical issue or some other thing. And that what happens is when people move out into, when they're surrounded by chaos, their lives will be chaos. When they're surrounded by healthy neighborhoods, just real good communities, suddenly they start to act like everyone else. And so I think that's the secret of Switzerland, and I think that's what we need. I love what Ken Sim said, and I love what John Rustad was touching on. We've got to end this concentration. Half of all our problems are in the concentration alone. So that's where I'm going.
Heidi, let's go to sort of big picture. How crucial is housing to address some of the other issues we're seeing around crime, around drug addiction, around safety on our streets?
Well, housing is a solution. People need roofs over their heads to be able to be well and be able to move on in their lives. So absolutely, it's a critical piece. I can say from being in housing over 25 years, I've seen the difference it makes, whether we're taking people from encampment to moving them into shelter, getting them the connections. That's where the magic really happens. But it's nothing one party can do on their own. You know, we say housing, we bring the capital, we bring the operating, but we work with municipalities to bring forward sites. We work with our health partners to embed health supports because they're so integral to the success of people moving along. And we work with nonprofits like Covenant House that support the people on a daily basis.
Yeah, so to that point, Heidi, is to continue on with how challenging is it then to integrate these services? Because as you know, housing alone won't solve the problem. So what do we need to do from a policy end to ensure that we are delivering the suite of services needed in combination with, frontline housing?
Well, I'd first of all say that we need diversity of housing. It's not a one-size-all-fits-all. Everybody's unique and different in what their support needs are. But definitely the collaboration between health partners, support services partners is really integral. And I'm really heartened to see the province doing a lot more cross-ministry work. We're sharing data with our health partners so that we can plan for new sites that are opening to ensure that the services are there.
And to continue on to that point, on the nonprofit side of things, where does the integration take place, and what challenges have you seen in designing a system that works to provide the services that are needed? Once someone gets into housing, where do we provide those services, and what design challenges are there here in Vancouver?
Yeah, so I think first of all, as Heidi said, I think it's really that partnership is incredibly important. It's really the power of partnership. So you look at all of the, everyone coming together in the community, and we could not do what we do. We've been in Vancouver for 28 years now without our partners like BC Housing. But, we've got also partnerships with Vancouver Coastal Health. We have the Foundry that's been at Covenant House since pretty much its inception. And so those partnerships are critical. But I really, what we see is, in our young people and what they tell us as well. So when we talk about housing and integrated partner, services and partnerships, is that when, for the young people that come to us, there's been a lot of trauma. And so it's really spending that time to really, build the trust and sort of peel back those layers and really getting to the root of what the issues are. And we also need to have, it takes time, and we need to have the services and the partnerships there to be able to then start to, offer that support. And so having the housing and having that continuum and all of those pieces is critically important, because when you are feeling hopeless and you've been on the streets and you have, even if you haven't been, when you're, suffering with, mental health and addictions and such, to try and navigate the system and to look at a sort of segregated or siloed approach is an impossibility. So to have, to have the services there, to have the partners come together, nonprofits can't do it alone. We need the government, we need, BC Housing, we need all of those, partners coming together.
I'd like all three of you to answer this so you can think about it. Sam, I'll start with you. But you talk about that impossibility there. I think people struggle, they see it on the news or they see it in their community, homeless encampments that grow and grow and grow, and then they're offered housing, and people turn the housing down. People say, I don't want to move in to one of those housing units for various different reasons. And I think the general sense from the public is a sense of frustration. Look, you're being offered what we believe you need, and you're turning it down. So for all of you, I'll start with you, Sam. Where is the biggest barrier here when we're finding people that need a place to live and they're saying, we don't want either that type of housing or what we're being offered? You've served in many positions here. Where do you see the biggest barrier being to connect those who are struggling on the streets that are being offered housing to actually get them, into that bed?
Yeah, just a couple of anecdotes. Recently, guys have a serious drug addiction problem. He wants to live in White Rock. That's where his mom lives. That's where his brother is, who has a job for him. But he says the only housing they're offering me is the downtown east side. And another one, Michael Geller just brought this one up, is a woman who had just had a baby. She said, I've been offered the downtown east side. It's a terrible idea. I don't want to raise my child there, but it's the only thing I have. And if I say no, I go to the bottom of the list. So I think we need to do more, rent subsidies. Why can't this guy move? If he had $500 a month rent subsidy, he'd be able to live in White Rock, far away from all of the drug, the concentration, and yet he can't, because we built these big, expensive buildings. That's where we put them, which is a disaster for them. So the other thing we really have to concentrate on is we have a terrible zoning problem. And, up until the 1930s, we didn't have zoning. There was no planners. People could build whatever they wanted on their lot. Then in the 1970s, it really tightened up, where there's so much regulation on anything that you can't build housing that people need. So we need to loosen up. We need the free market to come back into our zoning system. And we've got some ideas on that, but I can't go into them all now. But that's what I think.
And Heidi, I know it's something BC Housing struggles with. You work in partnership when these encampments get broken up, and then you're there to provide it, and sometimes you're told no. So what do you see as the biggest barrier?
Well, I don't look at it as well, I do. We have a housing crisis and we don't have enough housing for all. But to Sam's point, I would just say that the province has come forward with additional rent supplements and supports because we do recognize that there needs to be a variety of different housing options. So when we are going to an encampment, we have as many offers and varieties of housing options for people. I said it earlier, it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need different resources. We need to build a broad housing system with a variety of housing options for people, including the rent supplements. Not everybody wants to live in congregate housing. We need youth housing. We are seeing more seniors in our shelters, so being cognizant of that as well.
And Deb, to you, where do you see the greatest barrier?
I agree with the panel on, and I think just uniquely to because we're serving young people is the housing options, they need to be appropriate for youth in our community. So when we even look at the transition from Covenant House into the community, some of the housing options we would not want our young people going to. These are vulnerable young people and then going into another vulnerable situation, especially when they've worked so hard on their road to independence. So I think it's appropriate housing, and I'm speaking specifically, as I said, with the lens of young people. And the one thing too, I think that it's hard for maybe us in community to understand is that what we find in our low barrier program. So that's the program where young people can come into Covenant House. They're not ready for any of our other programs, like our case managed programs and the clinical teams that can come in and really start to help them with their goals. And they haven't been, some of them haven't been inside or had a room or had a bed for a very long time. And so when we opened that program, they would, often, walk around the room and sort of look at the bed and just, and we're so grateful to be there. But it takes a while for even that transition to happen. So I think when we assume that, people might not want a particular type of housing, there also are other layers there that will, cause somebody maybe to respond in that way. And for us, it's taken time. It's taking time to build that trust again and make sure that we've got the right approach, that they're in the right place. And
Heidi, I'll go back to you with this one. We increasingly see municipalities concerned about housing being forced upon them, even to the specific neighborhoods. These are debates we've had in a long time in Metro Vancouver and in Victoria and across the province, that certain neighborhoods feel that those housing units are not best suited for them. You see pushback from residents. In some cases we call them NIMBYs, in some cases we call them community advocates. It depends on the neighborhood. Why do you believe we continue to see these tension points in neighborhoods, and how can we address concerns from specific communities that housing is being imposed upon them that doesn't fit into their neighborhoods, when we know, as you've described, we have this tremendous shortage of housing, and there's some thought that we just need to put people wherever we can find the places to put them?
Well, there are limitations on land and zoning and where we can put the housing. So when you're in a crisis situation, you're looking to do whatever you can to get people the housing they need. I'd really highlight the difference you see when people have a roof over their head. And to your point earlier, we don't give up on them. It may take 2 or 3 offers before they accept, because we take a person-centered approach that people are vulnerable and they've experienced trauma, and even coming inside can be challenging. But more to your question, that's where we have to work with the municipality. We're doing a lot of engagement with our communities because there's a lot of misconceptions about supportive housing. And it's important that we get the information out there of what it really looks like. And the benefit to supportive housing, especially when it's purpose-built, and Mayor Sim spoke to that, the value of that, it's designed a specific way to be able to best support people. You know, it's got the secure entrance, it's permanent, people have their own units, their kitchen. We want to empower people to be the best that they can be. We want to create space in the supportive housing to have a health presence there as well.
How worried, though, Deb, should we be that if we're putting housing in neighborhoods where there's resistance from the community, that the community, in essence, shuns their neighbors and says, we don't want you here if they're struggling with drug addiction, if we see some of these concerns with crime, and there's those tension points that exist in neighborhoods. How concerning should that be to people in this city where we continue to see housing possibilities in places where there's pushback?
I think it's, it is concerning, and we've got work to do for sure. And a lot of it is around also communication and education. So if I even think about the locations that we're in, and we've had 3 new buildings that have gone up in the city over the last decade, and it was a lot of meeting with our, the community that was around, the areas that Covenant House operates, and that's not a one and done type of relationship. This is about a partnership with the community. So it was about, lots of intentional discussions around what the work is, what is, the support that we're offering, and how that can impact our community. I mean, we're all, an investment in our young people is an investment in our community. So really educating on what that is can go a long way, and it's also the communication, and that needs to be ongoing. That relationship really needs to be it's not perfect, and we do our very best though with the neighborhood just to make sure that we're always listening and always engaging as well. And I would say that for neighborhoods throughout the province.
Sam, you know it, as being a mayor and an MLA, when a neighborhood's frustrated, you hear from them, probably a lot more than neighborhoods that aren't frustrated. You've also toured around the world. What is the sense you get about the way that we do things here in Vancouver with neighborhoods and municipalities, and are there ways that we can improve it to not create some of those tension points that we've seen?
Well, the real problem is when you get a kind of an institutional solution, but you don't get that when it's individuals. If one person moves into one area, that's not, there's no legal issue around there, there's no planning issue around there. So, if you're really looking at just letting people live where they think that they can get the most support personally and where they want to live, and they're surrounded by healthy people, that issue doesn't even come up.
Heidi and Deb, this one's for you. I'll start with Heidi. We know housing is an incredibly scarce resource in this city. When there are people that come forward needing housing, how do we, as a province, ensure that the right people are getting into those units? And how challenging is it to ensure that those that need it the most, when they need it, because we have a gamut to run, somebody who may be willing to try treatment, to get off drugs, to get off the streets, to a single mom fleeing domestic violence. How hard is it to prioritize a scarce resource in the city?
Such a great question, because there is so much need, and it's across the spectrum. The process for women and children fleeing violence is different than supportive housing. So I think it's important to highlight that. We have transition houses and second stage housing for women fleeing violence and children. In terms of somebody who needs supportive housing, we do have a registry and people fill out applications. Our support services partners are awesome with supporting people to fill out those applications. Applications come to a community access and assessment table where their application is reviewed. It's not always just the need. I think it's really important to think about what are those persons' personal support needs. A best practice is not to put somebody in a building that's not going to work for them, or the supports in that building don't match their needs. So I would just highlight the importance of taking the time and thinking about each and every person as they go into a supportive housing site. We really do do our best to be thoughtful about that. But with the housing crisis, with not having enough units, we can't always do it as perfectly as we'd like. But in summary, we think about each person and their need and matching them to the appropriate housing. And that's why we are appreciative of the spectrum of housing or system of housing we're creating, with either specialized populations or moving away from congregate housing and using rent supplements for people that don't need supportive housing, so they can move out into the market as well.
Deb, are we doing it right here based on the sense you get on the front lines?
You know, we definitely, as Heidi said, it's a one-size-fits-one approach for us. So every young person, every individual that comes to our doors, then we look at our programs. And if we have a bed and the need, is there, then we will make sure that we match that for that young person. But there is more need than beds that we have. And so our team works really hard to try and, find a place. If we have somebody that comes to our doors and we're full, which obviously is all of the time. And so the need is there. There's a need for more, and kind of, the team does the best they can to make sure that there's a safe place, especially for youth. We want to make sure that they're housed and they're vulnerable, and we don't want them on the streets. We want to get them in and keep them safe, but we do everything we can internally and then work with our partners externally.
Sam, this is for you. One of the things that makes Vancouver so unique is we don't just have this tremendous need for supportive housing or those coming off the streets or, those in tough circumstances. We have so many that just struggle to pay the rent. Based on the cost of living and the cost of housing in this city, we have people in some cases who have steady, good jobs who can't afford to pay the rent. They have circumstances where the place that they are renting sees tremendous increases that puts pressure points on them. And then that leads in some cases to this cycle of struggle, right? That they lose their place to live, they can't find somewhere else to live, they're either going couch to couch or they're struggling on the streets. That could lead to a situation of drug addiction. Sam, you've been watching this issue and been in the city a long time. It is getting worse and worse and worse and more expensive. Just to the core sense, how do we address stopping the cycle and allowing people to feel that they can afford a safe place to live that isn't just bare minimum, that it's a home for them?
Well, we have only one place in the city that is not heavily regulated by all the planning rules, and that's called SNOC. And there's a tiny little tear in the fabric of our planning. And what happened? A tiny 11-acre site, 11 towers. That's the market demand. So the problem is not that we don't have housing. We're not allowed to build housing. The real estate developers are desperate. They'll build anything. Give them a permit. They'll build it. There's such a demand. The market is not allowed to work. We have a central planning system. It's interesting that we brought that planning system in 1928, the same year that Joseph Stalin brought central planning to the Soviet Union. And we got rid of the central planning for our economy. We don't allow the government to central plan our economy, but we still allow the government to central plan our urban planning, our cities. So let the system work, let the market work, let people start building more housing and spaces. Don't dictate to them how it has to be.
Sure. But the province has put in a huge swath of legislation that supports this idea, but it hasn't been very well received by every municipality. There's been frustration that's a heavy hand of government, that they are allowing for 4 to 6 units in places where communities can't handle them. There isn't the support for the infrastructure that supports the housing. So, where does that legislation fall short of what you're alluding to, considering we're starting to open up those tools, but there's been resistance to it?
Okay, I'll just briefly tell you where our solution's going, which is that we can't do this top-down stuff. That what we need to do is do what we did in 1928. They set up the Zoning Board of Appeal, in which anybody could go to that Zoning Board of Appeal and complain and say, no, there's a market for this building. I want to build it, and the zoning board of appeal could do it. What they did was the planners hated that, and they got it changed. They got the name changed. It's now called the Board of Variance, and it's supposed to just be allowing people to make tiny little changes. That's not what it was for. It was for like a judicial system to enable the system to accommodate change. And so we do need a bottom-up system that could do that. And it's all there in the Zoning Board of Appeal. It was set up in 1928. They quickly crushed it, turned it into the Board of Variance, and made it basically toothless. So that's a little insight into where I'm going with that.
Sure. Heidi, it hits on some things, but we do have various ways in which the province works on housing. BC Housing is a huge provider, as well as working with nonprofit sector, as well as the for-profit sector. You know, how has this new legislation changed the way that BC Housing does business? And, you know, where are the next steps towards getting some of those access points around access and affordability?
Well, anytime we look at change and creating more housing is a real benefit. And working with developers, having partnerships beyond nonprofits is very beneficial as well. You know, we heard talk earlier about mixed buildings, and that's a great option as well. We just need more housing, we need diversity, and again, just speaking to what we've all said about the value of partnerships.
Yeah, and Deb, you are a crucial partner in all of this. Where do we need to go to find, in essence, more partners? Like, do we have enough service providers that exist here, and is it the right model to grow to meet the need that we have in our community?
Well, I think we talked about it today, you know, we heard it in the other sessions, but it takes the voices as we are today of all of us coming together. So if we have all of the, you know, we can really look at the intersections of the, you know, of the work or the, you know, the different views that we all bring to the table when we are making these decisions around, you know, and I think that's a really critical part in terms of the partnership piece. And, you know, one of the things that we look at in our supportive housing program, and some of our young people have been with us for years, and so we're really looking at transitioning now out of Covenant House, and then there's this cliff, right, the affordability cliff of, you know, where do they go, and where do we ensure that we've got the safety nets in place for them to go next. And I think, you know, those are really important parts of this. If we look at when we were talking with partners and the different developments and also scattered sites, like really transitioning, you know, them into, you know, areas and places to you know, model what, you know, life is like as we, you know, exit some of the programs and such.
Sam, we've had a housing crisis in Vancouver for a long time, but we haven't always had this crisis of public safety, that people have felt nervous on the streets. You know, you described it, the downtown east side is not new, but there is a new feeling that things are growing, that people feel unsafe. So what do you contribute that recent increase in a feeling of a lack of safety, considering, you know, a lot of these challenges we're talking about are pretty old challenges?
Well, it's just a cycle that's going on ever since the 70s when we started concentrating people. The more you concentrated, the more chaos. The more chaos, the more public outcry. The more public outcry, the more money they put into the downtown east side, which causes more concentration, which causes more chaos, which causes more public complaint, which causes more money going into the downtown east side, which causes more and more and more. So the thing is, we've got this concentration where people, once you get a large enough group of people in chaos, the social norms change. You know, stuff that would never go on anywhere else can now go on in a concentrated place. So we got to dilute that and make sure that people can't get away with the stuff that they're getting away with now. And that's part of the solution. I met with a group that in Switzerland that has 80 suites in 80 buildings. You know, so every building they have one suite, and they have people in those buildings who know about them and look out for them, and you know, it becomes more of a community thing. So I think there's too much emphasis on government spending money on things, That's not how it used to be 50 years ago. It was all done through community. People would be able to look out for each other. And if you read these books, Michael Kleckner wrote a book on the rooming house in Vancouver. He owned one. And there was always one person in the house who was about to fall off the wagon. And they knew that if that happened, the landlady, usually it was a woman, and most of the land owners there were women who were elderly, single, for divorce, or widowed, and they were ruthless. If anybody didn't have a job in this rooming house, there would be World War III, because they'd make sure they were at their job, and they did not want to be bad neighbors. They didn't want the people living in there doing bad things in the neighborhood. So the incentives were all right. They were well established. So that's the solution that the market brought, and we need to go back to market solutions.
Yeah, Heidi, Sam brings up one of the big issues that is often flagged, that when you have people in congregate living, you may have someone who is in the midst of recovery, trying to get off of drugs, and then they are paired up, even on the same floor as someone who is in the midst of their throes of addiction. And that relationship leads to somebody getting back into addiction, and then could lead to crime and that feeling of lack of public safety. So what is BC Housing doing to address some of those concerns that we have heard around congregate living and the impact it's having on someone's recovery that could lead to other really negative challenges that we have out in our communities?
Well, that's where those partnerships come in, and, having house supports on side. We know that people are more impactful when they're on the street. So our goal is to keep them housed. And if it's not working in their current housing, we do our best to look for other housing that will better meet their needs. But at this point in time, we do have more congregate living. But we continue to look at other options. Many of our nonprofit partners are very creative in building relationships with landlords. So they've been very successful in being able to allocate rent supplements and move people out from supportive housing and create that positive flow.
Yeah, Deb, how do you solve that issue?
Yeah, so we exactly as that. I think we are dealing with a younger population. So they're in terms of housing under one roof for us. I mean, we need to make sure that the youth in our community are safe. So that's the primary goal when they're coming into our doors, and then making sure, as I said, that we've got appropriate programming for them, so they are under one roof essentially, or three roofs. But really, when we start to look at that moving beyond the programs and into the community, and as Heidi said, those partnerships are crucial, and we have those. Part of our new strategy, around restoration is expanding that, so that we can make sure that we can really have those safety nets in the community where we can ensure that young people can land and as young adults now and can start the trajectory of their lives and their goals and their dreams and all they've been working on.
Yeah, and that's one of the big challenges we hear, that families say they raise their kids in a certain neighborhood, and those kids can't afford to live in that neighborhood they grew up in, and they're being pushed further and further away from the city of Vancouver, and it's disconnecting families, and this is leading to a much larger issue around disconnection, around supports. You've been, again, Sam, in this a long, long time. One of the things that we spend a lot of time in the news talking about housing prices. They go up, they go down, they break records. We do a poor job at measuring the sort of success points about putting someone in a house and what that means and how those neighborhoods stay together. So do we need to find a better way to measure housing rather than just the cost in terms of how we supply it as a necessity for people?
Well, I think it's a real problem with the planning system that we have. Most of the planning proposals that come forward are all qualitative. We're going to achieve sustainability, affordability, neighborliness and things like that. What we need to do is stop allowing qualitative commitments and start asking for quantitative commitments. The PIR, the price income ratio, should be no more than 4. Why don't we have that? Because if you look at what's going on in the planning proposals, we're at 18, 19, 20, in terms of price income ratios. It's just terrible. If you start asking planners to give you numbers, okay, don't tell me about affordability, tell me what the PIR is going to be. And then because right now you don't know when we've achieved it. They say we're going to make this really affordable and sustainable. What does that mean, And they build it, and no one can go back and say, you didn't achieve this goal. So you need to ask them to come forward with solid, measurable, quantitative goals.
We have a couple minutes left, and Jess is doing great work, and Save Our Streets is fantastic, but I'm guessing everyone in this room probably wishes Save Our Streets didn't exist, that we didn't need to put together a forum like this to address these concerns. Jess was probably a lot happier before having to worry about all of this stuff. But if we are sitting here in 5 years' time, we still have this conversation around housing, public safety, what do you think that conversation is like 5 years from now? And what do you hope we will have done between now and then? And all of you will get a chance to answer this, and I'll start with you, Heidi.
Prevention is where I'm going to start first, and that's focusing on our youth and strengthening our youth programs. When we look at the point-in-time count data, we see chronic homelessness starts at a very young age. So what can we do to disrupt that and ensure that there is housing continuity for our youth? And second of all, really focusing on the partnerships, because you're hearing it today. We all have a part to play in addressing homelessness and ensuring housing is available for all. So those would be my two focuses for the next 5 years.
How about you, Deb?
So many. I would say I would agree 100%. And we're really also looking at prevention. And so we've heard that today. It's we are with our younger population, and so we can affect change. This is where we can prevent this entrenched homelessness. And so if we can look at our programming and what we can do at Covenant House, we've been in Vancouver for 28 years. We're thinking about how we can share those learnings with others across the province. We can go and partner and do whatever we can to really get upstream. So it's the partnerships in the schools. How can we, as we're connecting it with the schools, prevent homelessness from beginning when we know a young person starting to couch surf and there's issues, and we do that now, but how can we broaden that and really get ahead of this, and see change? And I would say the other big piece that, mental health is health, and we are always going to see this. And so access to services is critical. Again, when you're in a state where your mental health is at varying levels, to try and figure out where to access services or how, and we hear this from families all the time. So families that still have their children in their homes and are struggling to, and we heard this, earlier today. So I would say prevention, access, and partnership.
And Sam, final word to you.
Lynn and I were in London, England a while ago, and we met these wonderful young people who have this housing theory of everything. And if you Google it, you can find some of their things that they've written about that. If you look at almost all of the problems of our society, whether it be economic, low birth rates, immigration, all things like this, they say it can be traced back to housing, lack of housing supply. So it just seems like so much of it comes right back to that. And unfortunately, it's in municipal government, and it's improperly designed municipal government. And I think that we need to look at this idea that, and I'll just add one little geeky thing to it. You've got the executive, legislative, and the judicial functions of government. Right now, what they did with municipal government is they put all three of these functions into one body called the City Council. And so the City Council is doing not only legislation, how to build housing, but they're actually doing the judicial part as well. You need to separate that. It's called the Zoning Board of Appeal, I mentioned, and you've got to separate the legislation from the judicial. So it's a different body that approves the actual developments. The city council should have total power over how it's done. They should be able to design the adjectives, but when it comes to the approval, it has to be done by a separate body.
All right, thank you, and a big thank you, Heidi Hartman, Deb Lester, and Sam Sullivan. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you all for sharing your experiences with us. And a big thank you to Richard. Great job. Great job.